Peace and love, everyone. Welcome to my channel. If you're new, please like and subscribe. And I'm your host, Queen Tamara of Astral Healing Arts Wellness Center. And I want to say Happy Indigenous Peoples Day to everyone out there. And also happy Monday or Moon Day. And today we're going to talk about the importance of Indigenous Peoples Day. As we hold space for this day in 2025, we will discuss what this means for us in these times and how we can express ourselves as Indigenous people of Mother Earth. To call yourself Indigenous is very noble, and it comes with a long history, family, a history marked with resilience, resistance, courage, and of course, great strength. So tonight we're going to be talking about what it means to be Indigenous and how we can best recognize and honor Indigenous Peoples Day, because we know, although it has been made a holiday here in the US, but we know that Indigenous People Day is every day, because you can't just honor a whole planet full of people in just one day. And it's not something that you should do just once a year. It's it should govern how you live your life, because as Indigenous people, you're Indigenous every day, not just um October 13th, just like the other holidays where they have special months for history of certain cultures and ethnic groups. You cannot put all of that history. History is what, thousands of years or more of events, and you can't put it all in just a month. So Indigenous Peoples Day is every day, but because today is set aside to honor that, we're going to be talking about that and how we can best honor and celebrate and hold space for Indigenous people every day. Okay, family. So there's a lot of confusion about who is Indigenous. And, it's a lot of conversation around that. And some people like to claim ownership of certain places, that they live, and, they feel, entitled to certain places. And, all of us who are the Earth's original people, we're Indigenous to some landmass, some geographical location somewhere, although we may not be presently living on the land of our ancestors, because of, this modern time with displacement and people moving around. But we're still Indigenous. Okay, so we're still Indigenous, although we may not be in our Indigenous homeland. So let's look at the definition of Indigenous. Let's define the word, and it means originating or occurring naturally in a particular place. Also means native, original, ancient, primordial. All of these terms represent Indigenous people, and we're all of that and then some. And yes, by the way, I do consider myself Indigenous as well. And Indigenous means like I said, you may be living in a place that is different from your ancestors, but you are still Indigenous. Um, Many original people and Indigenous people, the primordial people, have been displaced or driven from their ancient homelands and their Indigenous homelands. Yet, just because you are not living in the place that your ancestors live in doesn't mean that you're not Indigenous. So that's one area of confusion. And I said a few minutes ago that Indigenous is not something that you do once a year. It's who you are. It's how you live, how you represent your culture, and the guiding principles that you live by. All of those things make you who you are. as a person. So regardless of what people have classified you as, regardless of what you've been told, to know that being indigenous is more than just a term. It's something that you are. It's how you live. It's your lifestyle. It's your culture. It's how you express your spirituality. All of this is what makes you who you are. You can be indigenous regardless of what you have on. You can, wear your traditional regalia, your traditional clothes, and then there's times that you may have on civilian clothes. That doesn't change who you are. When I say civilian clothes, just your regular everyday clothes, or your work uniform or whatever. So that, even with that on, you're still indigenous. Okay. So the clothing doesn't make you who you are. It's who you are on the inside, how you express who you are, how you live, with guiding principles. All of those things is what makes you an indigenous person, not just how you dress and what kind of name, what name you have. So to be an indigenous person, we must honor and remember who we are. Some of us were not aware that we were indigenous people, and many of us are remembering who we are, or we're learning these things now, which is fine because we know that's a part of our legacy and our history when it comes to um, colonization and displacement and all of the things associated with that, and imperialism. And many people have been brainwashed and are not aware of their identity and who they are or where they came from. This is why it's so very important to do your genealogy, family. I'm in a I too taking my own advice. I'm in the process of doing genealogical searching myself, and it is work. It's a lot of work. It's like detective work, but it's very rewarding and it's worth it because you will discover a lot about who your family is. You'll find out a lot about your ancestors, their places of origin. If you are fortunate to know these things, because your family preserved this knowledge, that you're very fortunate. But many of us don't know these things, and it's something that we have to discover. And genealogical searching and is not only is it like a form of detective work, and it is detective work because it takes a lot of research and a lot of commitment, but it's so exciting to find out who your ancestors were and where they came from, and also discovering why, why did they move to a certain place, or other questions that you can get answered. And this is something we should take great pride in, knowing that we come from people with resilience and courage and nobility. So we must honor ourselves first as indigenous people, and in remembering who we are and awakening those seed memories in us, we will discover so much about ourselves in that process as well. Remember, we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. We are walking divinity, and we are sacred beings having a human experience. So, as Indigenous people, we are caretakers of the earth, and we should be caretakers of one another. And to be caretakers of one another, you also have to take care of yourself, because you are important and you are a sacred being as well. So as you um, honor and respect other people, remember to honor and respect yourself, and to um, take pride in yourself, remembering who you are and the nobility. If your ancestors were noble, so are you. Remember that. Remember that you come from a long line of courageous people, a long lineage of, you know, what whoever your ancestors were, and you are a part of that lineage. And if you find out that you came from some people that were maybe disagreeable, you it's up to you to make that change or make that shift. You may be the one that came into this family to make, to restore balance, or to restore integrity and righteousness. So, the power is within you and each of us to do that. And so many, but s- studying your genealogy is will help you to see, um, the further back you go in generations, you will see a lot of courageous people and people who were pioneers in some way, people who were leaders and change makers, just like we are. Many of us are leaders and change makers now. History does repeat itself, and people keep recycling and incarnating, and um, many people talk about how this time is so strange and so different, and it's unlike any other time on earth. And in some ways, yes, that's true, but in other ways, history repeats itself. History repeats itself again and again. So just like our ancestors had in certain enemies, and the enemy used certain tactics like divide and conquer to keep people subdued, and to create um, the element of chaos amongst us. That too is still going on. If you look around you today, there's still um, colonization going on, but in a different form. Um, Before, it may have been more overt. Now it's more of a underhanded kind of way, or more covert, but it's still happening and it's still going on. Many other isms from the past are still going on. The enemy, we have the same enemy our ancestors had. Enemy didn't change. The enemy just changed its warfare tactics. Um, if you ever study or that book, The Art of War, or read any other texts that help you prepare for combat, whether it's spiritual combat or physical or psychological or whatever, um, you must know your enemy and study your enemy and study their tactics, because as the war changes, their methods and tactics will also change. So we have the same enemy we've been having for generations. They just have changed how the warfare, the technology has changed. So it may appear different, and it may appear that um, certain things are not warfare, but it is. And now the enemy is using gaslighting techniques, creating confusion, and also there's a lot of Divide and conquer is still going on, very much so. You can see that, whether they're dividing people politically or dividing people based on ethnicity or language or what have you. Um, it's still going on. Same soup, folks, different bowl. Same war, just different weapons. Before, it might have been, blankets with smallpox, disease, guns, whatever. And now it's silent weapons for quiet wars. You all know what I'm talking about. So this is what's happening. And also, the energy and element of chaos, sometimes they can make you an accessory to your own demise. That is another tactic. And many people have been deceived by that, and they are thinking they're doing the right thing, but they're actually involved in helping um, with the destruction of the planet or its people. And you know there's a lot of confusion around that. So let's try to remember and who we are, and as Indigenous people, getting to know who our ancestors were and knowing who we are and honoring ourselves as them. You can't talk about how great the ancestors were and you don't talk about and or recognize the greatness in the people that are here around you, because we are our ancestors. Our ancestors are us. And um recognize the divinity and the sacredness in all beings. With keeping that in mind, that will be um, the guide, like the golden rule, how you treat people and how you treat one another. Is remembering that each and every one of us is a sacred being. Um, Another part of being Indigenous is to learn your history and discover what happened to your people. Discover, how they came to a certain area, what's their history, what lifestyle did they have, what traditions, what folk ways, what mores, what language they spoke. That's why it's so important to study genealogy, because genealogy is the key to your who you are and who your ancestors were. And it's very important that you remember to honor, as you honor them, you honor yourself. Be committed, family, to decolonizing your mind. Yes. And what do I mean by decolonizing? Colonization was a process. It didn't happen overnight. It was a systemic um, form of warfare, actually. And, it encompassed um, every aspect of our lives. It was economic, it was social, it was educational. It affected, the quality of medical care, if any, that we were exposed to. Um, I said economic, psychological, spiritual. It was all of that. So the mind and the thoughts that many of us have are not conducive to being free, independent, sovereign Indigenous people. So we really need to work on decolonizing our mind and recognizing what is the thought forms and the thought patterns of colonization and how that has infected and corrupted our lives. And we want to eradicate that. To decolonize is like, we have to retrain and relearn how to think and how to um, treat one another and how to live. Many of our thoughts are not our own or the ways of our people. And, if you study your ancestors, it was very important that, they call themselves names like the people, the principal people, the noble ones, the people that live by and by the mountains or the river, or the caretakers of whatever. They had different names like that, that honored who they were and what role they played in the grand scheme of things. And they didn't use derogatory terms to characterize or describe themselves, and nor should we. We should remember that we are a strong, noble, resilient, sacred people, and that we should regard ourselves in that way, and we should talk to each other in a way that expresses that, speaking life and power over one another, not always downing indigenous people, whether they are your own or another group. We need to honor and respect one another and respect ourselves. And decolonizing your mind, part of that is proper education. We know that we have been miseducated, and a lot of the history and the information that we've been taught is not correct. A lot of it is not, and a lot of it has been by design to keep us in a low vibrating way of thinking, and also a limiting way of thinking. So if the saying, as a man thinketh, if you think less of yourself, then you will express that. If you think you're nothing, if you think you came from nothing, then you will be acting out your nothingness. So if you think that, if all the history you've learned about your ancestors and your people has started with slavery, slavery is not the beginning of any group of people. And um, those of us who had ancestors who were enslaved, slavery has been around for a long time, and many different groups of people have experienced it in many different ways, whether it was transatlantic or prisoners of war on their own land and enslaved on their own land, or debt slaves, or whatever. It's been around for a really long time, and it's very unfortunate, um, part of history, and is in some places it's still happening. But these things help shape who we are, and we want to make sure that we focus on properly studying our history. That's why genealogy is so important, and studying real history, and where who our people were and where they came from. Because if you think that your ancestors were just enslaved, before they were enslaved, what were they doing? Who were their parents and their ancestors and their great great grandparents? What were they doing before slavery? And that goes for any group of people. If you've only heard about the massacres that happened to your ancestors, or the genocides, or and there's been so many different ones, different groups of people who have been wiped out nearly completely, or all, or in some, many of their people have been eliminated. Try and keep the conversation positive. But that's a part of the history and the legacy of indigenous people. Many of us have faced, our ancestors, and continue to face, genocides and ethnic cleansings and all these other fancy terms that they use for genocide. But it's a very unfortunate, but also know before that, what were they? Who were they? Where were they? And what were they doing? And seeking answers. Why did these things happen, and who did it? How, have we always lived this way? And if not, what was it like before? And when did it change? Who did it and why? These are the questions that we need to ask as we discover and learn more about ourselves, more about our history, um, and more about our ethnic groups, and the people that we come from, the groups that we come from. Another way that you can decolonize your mind is by taking better care of yourself and others. How you care for yourself says a lot about your self esteem and your level of self worth. We've had many discussions about that here on Astro Healing Channel, and it's the same is true of how you treat other people. People who are cruel and abusive to others, that says a lot about their character or lack of character, and it says a lot about what type of person they are on the inside and what mind they have. People who are wise and loving to themselves and loving to others, those people, that have that light within them that they share with the world, and they let that light shine, those folks are the ones that people will remember the most and love, honor, and cherish. And in order to love, honor, and cherish other people, remember to also give that same love, that same honor, that same respect, and praise that you would give others to yourself. And many people, don't love themselves as much as they give out to others. But as above, so below, as within, so without, what you give out to others, you also are deserving and worthy of it. Remember that you also are very worthy of your own love and your own self care. And self love and self care should come first. Remember to take care of yourself as you take care of others. Remember, be kind to yourself as you are kind to others. Remember to the thoughts that you're thinking, leave an imprint on you, have an effect on your body and your body temple. Remember to think positive and uplifting and loving thoughts to yourself. Say loving things to yourself as well as to others. So don't neglect yourself when it comes to that. Being another thing to focus on when it comes to decolonizing the mind is being a caretaker of the lands around you, whether it's your indigenous homeland or not. We know that everything is connected. The rivers flow into the ocean. So if we're going to preserve the ocean and save the oceans, we also have to take care of the bays, take care of the rivers, take care of the lakes and streams, and all of the areas in between the watersheds, because what's affecting them will eventually make its way into the ocean. So we have to also take good care of the land. Many of us have been trained to think that we are separate from the land, that the land is something that we use and exploit. And many people have approached um, the earth that way. That is why we having things like Earth Day now, which is every day. This is why people are working towards land stewardship and sovereignty, returning to their indigenous food systems or indigenous you know um farming and sovereignty. I think it's called indigenous food sovereignty. These are things that people are doing to honor the land around them, not to treat it as something to use and exploit, but to treat it as an extension of us, because we are a part of nature, just like, and nature is a part of us. And so many people are returning to their indigenous food systems and their indigenous methods and ways of caring for the planet and the flora and fauna on the planet. These things are not just objects, they are living, breathing beings, just like the trees and the plants and everything. And we have to honor them and treat them with the same loving care that we would want to be treated with ourselves. It's reciprocal, and we want to take care of and honor the earth. And although, in the past, many of us were taught that we and disconnected from the earth. But as we decolonize, we have to realize that the earth is our home and our mother, and that's why they call it Mother Earth. And we have to take better care of it. And taking better care of it, we're also taking better care of each other. Another thing, we as indigenous people, we have to always be courageous, speak truth, and speak power over ourselves and others. And I know growing up, I heard a lot about the civil rights movement of the 60s and 50s. I heard a lot about that growing up. And um, we saw people standing up for different things. There was a lot of political change going on at that time, and there were so many people who were regarded as heroes and sheroes who stood up and demanded change, demanded equality, demanded better living conditions, demanded freedom even. And those same people, we have to remember and um channel that same energy of resilience and that same energy of resistance. And we have to stand up for what we know is right. If you are the kind of person that likes, to protest or speak your mind or use your influence to speak out against things that you know and feel are wrong, then do that. Be courageous. Your voice does matter. One person can make changes, even if it seems like something oppressive is happening and it seems like it's so overwhelming and you feel powerless. If you find other like-minded people and motivate them, you all can come together, and there's strength in numbers. And sometimes you have to walk it alone. Sometimes you have to be, your own courage, your own warrior, your own, the lone wolf. Sometimes you have to travel alone and speak up and stand up on your own. Either way, whether it's strength in numbers or if you're a solo warrior, whichever it is, do it with courage, do it with pride, do it with fearlessness. um Remember your ancestors. We come from a long line of indigenous nobility. Our ancestors had pride, honor, respect, and so do we. They stood their ground and fought bravely against their enemies, and so should we. Resistance and courage. you know um Stand up for what is right. Stand up and speak up for other people who are in a worse situation than you are in. Remember to stay strong. Remember to arm yourselves with the knowledge of self. That is one of your greatest weapons against any spiritual, psychological, or physical warfare, is knowing who you are and living your truth. Your ancestors' wisdom and your connection to divinity are also your armor and your weapons. And of course, always, always um, the Most High Divine's guidance and protection is always forefront in when it comes to being protected. So we have all of those things with us. We stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, and they're actually, not only we stand on their shoulders, but they're beside us. So always remember that you're not alone, and you have so much to be proud of today and all days. So with that said, family, remember to be patient with yourself, be patient with others when it comes to everything, because we know we're living in a time where we are dispelling the darkness, coming out of this long period of spiritual darkness, and many people are having a difficult time with the changes, and some people are just not ready. And you have to be patient with them, because we are breaking cycles and of thousands of years of mental conditioning. So just keep that in mind when dealing with people. And we bid you all a peaceful good night. This is going to be a special week with the energetic cosmic changes. We'll probably have another lecture later this week on that. Get ready for it, folks. And so I bid you all a peaceful, loving evening. Peace and love.